Okay, so let's go ahead and let's start off with Xiang Yu as we recap the buffs that happened over the weekend. Obviously, tomorrow we've got the Lancer one. That's the big one that I'm hopeful for, but we'll have to wait and see. So Xiang Yu got an upgrade. He was the Berserker that I kind of picked for this. I was telling people he's just not in a good state. He still isn't, frankly. They kind of got it right with him, but not really. And to be fair, what they did is they came in and they gave Xiang Yu an NP interlude. So originally his Noble Phantasm just dealt damage to all enemies. It was a quick AoE Noble Phantasm, 5 hits, crappy NP gain, so he did not actually get a whole lot of refund. And his overcharge effect increased NP damage for 1 turn 20%. But they come in, they upgrade it, and they add Ignore Defense to it. Definitely nice since he does actually have Invuln Pierce in his kit. Now he ignores any sort of attempt to try and defend against him, and quite literally is going to carve through even defense buffs and things like that. So definitely a nice thing for him to have. This makes him a relatively unstoppable Berserker, but not gonna be your like go-to looper type of guy. They did also increase his own critical damage by 50% for 3 turns activating first, which I have to say is proof that the devs still don't get it. I'm sorry, like, yes, this is a really, really strong thing to add, but Xiang Yu already had critical damage for 1 turn on his first skill of 100%. Xiang Yu also had critical damage on his second skill for 50%. So what are you doing, devs? You've given 1 unit 200% crit damage. And they're already a quick unit that stacks with Scotty that also has 100% crit damage in their kits. So like, huh? You're turning him into a crit monster. So the case that I'm gonna make here for Xiang Yu and why the devs still don't get it is, this is literally an Iskandar or an Altera situation all over again. You see, the issue with Xiang Yu is he's not very easily usable. He's not very loopable. That appears to be how the devs wish to differentiate him from other sort of more prolific Berserkers. But frankly, that just makes him bad. In a meta where every Berserker seems capable of looping, Xiang Yu is really the odd man out. And yes, you can force a 3-turn out of him. It's just not a very pretty one, as it usually involves double Oberon. So to me, this is a really, really just weird thing to do with him. I get that the way to fix Xiang Yu's looping probably doesn't start with his Noble Phantasm. So in that regard, that's fine. But stacking more crit damage on the Berserker that already had the most crit damage before this buff is kind of stupid. Just saying. So yes, it's a good upgrade. It absolutely helps him. But I really wonder what the devs are thinking with this, as they're just pushing him further down one trick. And then when they finally do come back years later and give this man some sort of charge skill or something like that, they're going to regret it, because he is going to become quite the monster when they do. It's the same thing they did with Altera. It's the same thing they did with Iskandar. They, for years, tried to avoid giving the unit the thing that they actually needed, and then they kind of made that unit into a monster when they finally caved. It's going to happen here with Xiang Yu in the future. So right now, he's still in a really weird spot, but this is definitely an odd upgrade. Obviously, he got the standard amount of NP damage upgrade, where NP2 became his NP1 and NP5 became his NP2. So his new numbers here are definitely solid. And he reduces all enemies' defense by 20% for 3 turns after damage goes out. So following up carding and critting, it's just going to hit harder. So definitely a nice thing in that regard. They did not touch his overcharge at all. That could have been something that maybe would have helped out damage output wise, but I'm going to say damage output's not really his biggest issue. It's quite literally his ability to function in a conventionally set up like 3-turn environment. Don't get me wrong, you can still take him into challenge content, you can still make him do pretty solid work, and he's definitely going to crit like an insane man, but he is a horse. And the horse, of course, here is going to have problems with being able to be kept alive and being able to be fed stars. He does at least have the critical star absorption on the first skill there. It definitely helps him out. But the issue at play with his other crit buffs here is they are both one turn. So if you sync everything up, if the stars literally align, he will pop off, but only for that one turn. So therein lied the problem with this. I definitely like the NP interlude. It's a good thing that he has it. Helps give him some staying power when compared to the other berserkers. But I look at kind of what they did with the NP, and I just really question what the devs are thinking by giving this man even more crit damage. So let me know what you guys think about the Xiang Yu buff, and if you think this will actually impact your desire to use him more. But still, in the meantime, let's go ahead and let's talk about refund scenarios for Xiang Yu. So on screen now, you guys should be able to see the actual refund numbers for Xiang Yu. He's got sort of two scenarios, one against just about every class and the other against berserkers, because berserkers are really terrible to loop against, which is ironic since he's a berserker himself. And if you look in scenario 1 at basically 3 out of 15 overkill hits, we're assuming a 3 enemy wave. We are assuming a singular hit on each of them, and that hit kills. And that's how you're getting the 3 hits of overcharge. In that scenario, Xiang Yu with a double Summer Scotty setup refunds 21%, almost 22. Not great. If you're looking at him at a maxed out 15 out of 15 possible hits being overkill, which means every single hit, literally the very first hit on each enemy, killed the enemy, which is highly unlikely to happen. Even in that scenario, Xiang Yu only refunds 30% at best. So odds are you're not hitting that nice 30% breakpoint. Instead, you're going to be looking at Xiang Yu refunding 20% most of the time. He's in dire need of like a charge kill or something like that. Or again, just trying to maybe crit after the fact with his cards. But again, he's not really somebody that's known for card performance too much outside of critting. And he doesn't really have arts cards, so to speak, just the one. So at this point, he's kind of in a weird spot for how he should be handled. Things like the Mighty Chain definitely help him, but he's gonna need access to that arts card to help him out, which is probably going to come from somebody else not named Xiang Yu. And if you're up against triple berserker, then even 3 out of 15 overkill hits won't get you to the 20%. You're gonna be looking somewhere more in the realm of like 8 to 9 hits probably in order to hit that 20% breakpoint, and that's not solid. That literally means that more than half of his hits have to be overkill in order for you to even get to 20% refund. Again, if he can get even 10%, he can be somebody that can manage to be able to, 3-turn with double Oberon, but none of these numbers are exactly good enough to make him work in a traditional double Scotty system. So therein lies Xiang Yu's problem. Talking about his actual charge scenario here and how you would use him in a proper composition. Now you guys are going to see on screen here Xiang Yu in a 3-turn and him going up against a 3/3x Berserker node. In this scenario, you got to use double Oberon. So you're going to start out the front line here with 1 Summer Scotty and 1 Oberon with another Oberon on the back end. He's going to need either a maxed out append and normal K-scope or a super scope to start out with. He's going to get all of the Summer Scotty's first and second buff there. That way he actually has a little bit of steroid to help him out, and he's going to have to just fire off the NP with just that. So damage is not going to be too good round 1. Then his refund will only be about 13% just from having a single Scotty. From there, you're going to be looking at using her charge skill. That is going to bring him up to about 60%, 63%, somewhere in there. And you're going to rotate her out for the other Oberon and pop both of the Oberon's first skills. That should bring him up to 100% charge since they're 20% each. And he should be able to fire off a second MP with a little bit more firepower. That should refund yet another 13% there. And then for the final wave, we're going to pop both Oberon's second and third skills on Xiang Yu, maybe throw in the Mystic Code attack buff, and fire off the NP one more time. Again, damage not going to be too good in a composition like this. Wave 1 and Wave 2 really just not going to be solid until you get to Wave 3 with the Oberon steroids kind of beginning to pop off with him and work with that overcharge buff that he has. Otherwise, damage output not going to be too solid. Though admittedly, the NP buff will help. Next up here, we've got Xiang Yu's raw numbers. So this is just his damage under his own power. This is neutral damage. No sort of external buffs are being applied to him, just his own skills and literally a neutral damage environment, which Berserkers almost never hit. So in that regard, you can basically take all of these numbers and multiply it by 1.5 times, and therein lies your Berserker modifier. So looking at this, he deals about 31, almost 32k now in terms of having that NP interlude. That's not too terrible, especially since we're going to be, like I said, multiplying that by 1.5 times. You're looking somewhere north of 45k for his damage output. And at NP5, you can get him all the way up to almost 48k. So definitely a lot better number there, but not something either that a lot of people will feel the need to roll for a much higher NP level of Xiang Yu, at least not until he gets buffed. Taking a look at his actual damage now in a proper composition, we can see here that we have two possibilities. The one at the bottom here is going to be Xiang Yu in his old composition before his buff. Quite literally, it's the exact same comp. It's just him without the NP interlude numbers. And you can see at NP1 here, Wave 1's only about 49k. Wave 2 at 74k, almost 75, and then Wave 3 at 145k. So nothing too terrible. NP2 will bump those numbers up quite a bit, but if you remember what I said before, NP2, when you get an NP interlude, becomes the same number as NP1. We can actually see that reflected here, as if you look at the old numbers, the NP2 number at 66k here becomes the new NP1 number at 66k after the NP interlude. So that does give him a nice sizable bump up. And again, it's going to be pretty solid in terms of giving him a little bit more firepower for that early wave, that second wave, and allowing him to pop off a little bit harder on Wave 3. The issue is going to be having to brute force him, having to use something like a K-Scope. You're very likely to, even after this NP interlude, just get way more firepower out of using another more optimized Berserker for farming purposes. These sorts of things come down to, well, it may be what you can get away with, but at the end of the day, it's probably not worth using Xiang Yu for 3-turn farming. He's going to find his niche way more in being able to crit things to death and maybe being a unit that you kind of feed the stars to in order to allow that to happen. Let me know again what you guys think about Xiang Yu's buff. All right, next up here we have the Alexander buff. And Alexander's been another interesting one because honestly, as a low star rider, he's actually a pretty serviceable unit. He's always had very good AoE damage for a 3-star, and he's definitely outshone Medusa, who's his primary competition in that regard, for a long time. Now, we have Red Hair in the game, and honestly, Red Hair probably could have used the buff way more than Alexander, but Alexander at this point just kind of rolling around as top dog for the AoE riders. So again, damage output pretty good. He had his charm fixed in the past. But what they did is they came back in and fixed his first skill, his charisma. This used to just be a standard party-wide attack up for 3 turns of 16%, and then they changed it. They upped it to the nice even 20% for 3 turns, but they added party-wide critical damage for 3 turns of an additional 30%, kind of leaning into some of his more supportive aspects. And then also granting him a self 20% charge that doesn't scale with the skill. So you just get this automatically. You don't have to level the skill all the way up if you don't want to. And again, with him being a quick unit and that instead of a buster unit, we don't care too much necessarily about the cooldown unless we're taking him into a scenario where he's going to have to get back to it. So this is a really, really nice upgrade for him all around. It's just going to enhance his damage ever so slightly. It's going to help him buff the party, and it's going to help him be able to 3-turn, something he really couldn't do before now. I mean, he could, but his issue primarily was having to work in a double Oberon type of setup. And yes, that is something that can be done, but that's something that can be done by almost every single quick unit in the game. It doesn't make him special, and if anything, it was one of the things kind of holding him back. Now, obviously, post this buff, there still may be some scenarios where that has to happen. It may not be that his sort of NP gain rate is enough for him to be able to work in a better, more proper system. One thing's for certain, he's almost definitely going to require double Oberon if the node isn't just a standard 3-3-3 setup. Also, if the node has something like Berserkers in it, probably not going to work out for him well. Where he's really going to find value is in a node where, say, now all of a sudden you're facing Casters, his true counter class, and you're literally just going to find, you know, them being very good for his MP gain. Maybe it's a 3-3 type of setup node where the last wave doesn't matter, but the first 2 waves are 3 units each. That's where he's really going to shine. He's going to be able to work in a very conventional setup like that and be able to now, with this buff, work with double Summer Scotty as opposed to being restricted to just double Oberon. Again, I do think this buff is a very small thing, but it does help him out quite a bit. It's going to help him work out in sort of multiple damage dealer setups as well, since it'll give him a little bit of charge on top of his append to maybe be able to function from a better starting charge standpoint, get a little bit of damage, take out a wave, or, like we mentioned before, act as the actual devoted looper. So taking a look at Alexander's new refund scenarios here, we can see that basically the refund itself will not have changed from the old part, but what will have changed for him is the charge scenario. So as we look at this against caster enemies with a 3-wave setup, he will basically, at 3 out of 3 overkill hits, only be able to refund 12%. But at 0 out of 3, he's only going to refund 8%. What you need is 9%. You actually need that 9% so that it'll round up for you. That, paired with his 20% charge, will give him refund on a particular given wave of 30%, which is enough to work with something like, say, Oberon. Obviously, the rest of the waves, you're probably going to have to brute force, but this can work. The idea is going to be hitting that nice 9% breakpoint. Where that's going to be on different enemies may kind of fluctuate around. So if you're looking at that sort of scenario, it is what it is. But again, remember, against 3 enemies, he's a single hit Noble Phantasm. So 3 out of 3 overkill hits, whereas we might look at other units and say this is impossible for them to get max overkill hits, he's only got the 1 hit. So if he does kill the wave, he gets 3 out of 3 overkill hits. So that is what you're going to be aiming for, is for him not to low roll and for him to actually get every hit being overkill. I'm going to say maybe if there's like a single high health enemy against casters, it might still work out for him, because he might get down to 2 out of 3 overkill hits, and that might still be that 9% to allow you to round up. But that's kind of the worst case scenario for him. So in that regard, against casters, perfectly fine. Against neutral classes, he's looking at quite literally 6% if he doesn't get any overkill hits, maybe 7% there, and only 10% if he gets all 3, which is, again, just assuming he kills the wave. So still doable, but definitely a little bit more on the line. And then if we're up against Berserkers, at 3 out of 3 overkill hits, he cannot get even to 9%. So you really don't want to use him if the node has too many Berserkers in it. That's going to require you instead to work with him maybe with that double Oberon setup so that you can brute force it. Because otherwise, getting even the 10% charge, not a guaranteeable thing. And you got to hope at this point that it's not a full Berserker wave and setup, because that'll really hamper him. In a weird way, even that 10% matters in his case. If you're super worried about being able to hit this, maybe try to like finagle things in such a way that you can get him a little bit more NP gain somehow, or allow him to maybe card after the fact. Either one of those two things could help him out, but Unfortunately, there's no getting more overkill out of this because he's already maxed out at 3 out of 3 hits. Taking a look at his actual charge scenarios then, as we've already mentioned, if it's neutral or caster, he can work with double Summer Scotty as a loadout as opposed to Oberon and double Oberon. So this is much better of a scenario for him. Now, he will be having to start out either with a maxed out mana loading and normal K-scope, or a super scope with no mana loading whatsoever. Both of those things will work for him. The mana loading still probably a pretty decent one, at least to unlock on him, since at minimum, like we said, this will allow him to work in some sort of like multiple damage dealer setup. But what you're going to do, you're going to start out turn 1 with him already maxed out on charge. You're going to pop both the Summer Scotty first and second buffs on him, and then quite literally allow him to fire off the NP already. From there, he will refund approximately 10%, and you're just going to go ahead and pop both the Summer Scotty charge skills on him at that point. And you can already, if you want to, go ahead and rotate one of them for Oberon, fire off the NP one more time. He's going to get the 10% again. And then you're going to go ahead and use his charge skill, which is also his charisma. So you will have had to delay that so that you get better buffing in the earlier waves. And that will then allow him to be sitting at 30% dead even with that 10% refund, plus 70% from Oberon's skills, bringing him all the way up to full one last time. Pop all of Oberon's buffs on him, pop the Mystic Code attack buff, and absolutely go to town. And that would be how you complete the 3-turn with Alexander. Now, taking a look at Alexander's raw numbers here, first we're going to look at his old numbers. His old numbers, we're just going to kind of assume NP5 here. This is his raw numbers. These are not including external buffs, and these are just neutral, so not effective damage here. At MP5, he's going to be looking at about 28k under the old system. Now, don't expect a huge jump here because all we did was buff the charisma a little bit. Now, instead, he's looking at 29k with the new raw numbers here. Definitely helpful, but nothing too much to write home about in terms of difference. Now, as we look at his numbers in an actual composition, you're going to see a little bit more wiggle room here, but just again, due to the like sort of force multiplication effect of getting any sort of change in damage output. So already right there, you can see double Summer Scotty being the new way that it works. And so this is a very interesting thing. His old system worked with double Oberon and a K-scope. This quite literally made it so that his wave 2 damage was about 97k. Wave 3, 182k-ish. And these are still neutral numbers, not effective, so you'd be able to double it if he's up against casters and stuff like that. But the reason I'm pointing out Wave 2 is because if you look at his new setup here with double Summer Scotty, the issue is that his Wave 2 damage is actually lower. And the reason why is because Wave 1 damage is higher and Wave 3 damage is higher, but it's because we're actually having to delay the activation in a double Summer Scotty setup of his charisma skill until the 3rd turn. So it actually results in a net negative effect on his 2nd wave due to the nature of these things. His wave 1 is higher because he has that 2nd Scotty there for wave 1, but his wave 2 is lower because he still hasn't activated his own skill, and at that point, that's when the double Oberons came in the other version of this comp. So in a weird way, in the old system, he had more damage wave 2. In the new system, though, he'll have much higher damage on wave 1 and wave 3. The choice is kind of yours for how to kind of figure out how to use him properly there. I'm going to say it's going to depend on the node, and that will dictate where you can get away with him and where you can't, particularly with regards to how many enemies are in the node and what classes they are. So again, if it's all casters, he's in the clear. But if it's maybe a reduced number of enemies, watch out. And certainly if it is berserkers and things like that, you're going to have to be very, very careful about how you use Alexander. So let me know what you guys think about Alexander's new buff and whether or not you think this is going to impact his overall usability for your Chaldea, where you guys see yourselves using him at this point in time. All right, so now we have Martha coming up here. Martha is going to be our sort of newest unit getting the buff here as the 4-star rider. Now, by the time this video gets posted, we should have our Lancer buff. And in this case, Martha is an interesting one. I think she was somebody that I was expecting could get a buff, but didn't really think that she would be the choice. The reason why is because Martha does have a very defined niche. Throughout her kit, she has the ability to heal and cleanse debuffs. She also has the ability to strip the enemy of buffs, making her very good in certain like annoying raid formats and things like that. So she's always had these niche uses that have been valuable to her, and she has been one of the like better kept secrets of the game in that regard. That being said, definitely not too strong in the way of overall like damage. That's always been her weakness. So the devs actually came in and they upgraded her first skill. That skill originally was just a debuff resistance up for herself and a self heal. That's it. Nothing too crazy. Certainly a decent skill for keeping herself alive, but it's not a hard defense or anything like that. The devs come in, they upgrade it. They quite literally don't touch the original 2 effects. What they do instead is they give Martha 2 things that she needed. The first is 30% charge. This does scale with the skill, and the skill is on a 5-turn cooldown, which means it does allow you to operate now with the double Koyanskaya setup for her. So this is a huge thing. Now you will want to lure your mana loading for her and be able to use this to great effect. This allows her to work in multiple damage dealer setups where she can maybe take out a wave while also setting up another unit for success. Remember that third skill is a targeted defense down. And certainly this will allow her to kind of charge up in a 50% starting charge standpoint in that regard. But then when you consider double Koyanskaya applications, she can be a devoted 3-turner herself now. So that already just massively helps damage output for her. This massively helps her capability to be used in various different compositions. Then, on top of that, the devs said, you know what? She could use more damage. And they don't just stop there. They actually give her a party-wide niche that she didn't have before. It's 3 turns of 50% power mod up against dragon enemies for the entire party. Now, the interesting part about this is there's already other units that do stuff like this. For instance, Dobrynya, and obviously you have like Sumanai and his various variants, as well as Sieg, that can sit there and deal effective damage against dragons. So it's not the most like necessary thing in the world that she has this. Obviously, this is just sort of icing on the cake, but it does allow her another opportunity to be able to pop off and be able to be used effectively. And interestingly enough, if you're looking for another low star option to pair with her, someone like Georgios may actually work out really well, as Georgios' NP can turn people into dragons for the effect that would be exploitable by this skill. So she can be used kind of as a follow-up to that and still sort of a setup man to somebody else. She can be paired alongside Sumanai or any of the other anti-dragon units and just allow them to hit even harder. So this is still a really solid upgrade for her, even if at face value this doesn't seem like it's that strong. It's definitely a nice thing for her to have, and you are going to want to, at minimum, at least get the skill up into the level 6 range just to get the cooldown here. But I'm going to say you're really going to want to lure it so you get that flat 30% charge, if nothing else, on top of the maxed out dragon damage niche here. And remember, her NP can be used, as we already mentioned, as a setup device. It does reduce defense for 3 turns after it by 20%. So you can go ahead and utilize her in front of somebody else's Noble Phantasm as a means to be able to deal more damage after the fact. So her having the dragon power mod, her having defense down in multiple ways, is definitely really solid for her, and I actually really like this upgrade in what it's going to expand the capabilities for her to be able to do and be used in now. In that regard, I really do like Martha's actual scenario. Real quick here, let's go ahead and let's look at charge numbers for her and how you would use her appropriately. Now, like we mentioned before, you're going to want the maxed out mana loading append. She can be used with a 50% CE, so that'd be 70% starting charge. And your composition is going to be the standard Buster composition, which is double Koyanskaya of Light and Oberon there. So her starting out at 70% charge due to these two things, and her then having a charge skill herself, means she can go ahead, pop this turn 1, and have both the Koyanskaya buffs on her to be able to allow her to fire off more damage. So there you go. She uses her NP the first time. She's now in wave 2. And from here, you're going to go ahead and utilize both Koyanskaya's charge skills on her. It's going to actually bring her charge skill back. You could use it here if you wanted to, but I don't really recommend it, as it would be somewhat wasteful. So if you're only in like a 2-turn node or something, it's a possibility since it's on a 5-turn cooldown. But don't use it here if you're trying to 3-turn loop. So again, with the double Koyanskaya charge skills, she's going to be at 100%. Fire off the NP one more time. Now in turn 3, she has the 30% back, so go ahead and use it there. Rotate one of the Koyanskayas for Oberon. Go ahead and pop his, again, sort of 70% charge there. Use all of his buffs. And then go ahead and use the Mystic Code attack buff on her and fire off one more time. You can obviously add in her own skill 3 and things like that in order to enhance damage even further. So that is going to be how you complete a nice, easy 3-turn loop on Martha. Now, let's take a look at Martha's damage numbers in a sort of like raw environment. So this is not her with any sort of external buffs, her only under her own power. It's obviously all neutral damage, so don't assume too much here, but it's an interesting thing to see. So you can actually see we have 2 sets of numbers in this, and the first is to indicate the number if she has the defense down from her 3rd skill active on the enemy. The second is how much damage she will deal to other enemies that don't have the defense down on them. So in order to look at this, that means NP1 against normal neutral damage here, she'd deal 19k to somebody that she has the 3rd skill in effect on, but only 15k to someone that she doesn't. Remember, this didn't enhance her base damage at all. But now she has the new Dragon Niche, which even at NP1, neutral damage, only her own buff, means if it's against the defense down enemy, that's going to be 29k, which is a very solid number. And then if it's not, 22k, which is definitely going to be a little bit more worrisome, but nothing too weak there, as that'll certainly be nice. And then obviously these numbers are just going to go up as you get more additional MP levels, with it capping out at about 43k against dragons with the defense down and 33k without, and then 29k normal with the defense down and 22k without. So definitely an interesting thing to see there. But how does this look in a proper sort of setup here for her? So now on screen, you guys should be able to see Martha's new numbers, and they're very, very big, as there's a lot of possibilities that we have listed here, because we have NP1, NP2, and NP5. So for NP1, these are now her in her proper setup with double Koyanskaya Oberon, a level 100 cranking, which is sort of the best 50% CE for her, and a level 10 Neo plug suit. So at this point, you're looking at wave 1 being about 40k. Wave 2, if you have the 3rd skill Lord, you're going to have it on a short cooldown as well. So you're going to be able to use that on whatever's the high health enemy in wave 2. That's going to be looking at about 51, 52k. And remember, these are still neutral numbers, but now we have buffs behind them. Obviously, for non-defense units, that's still going to be about 40k there. But then wave 3, which is where the Oberon buff's going to come in, the Mystic Code buff's going to come in, really going to spike there. That's where you're going to be looking at 145, almost 146k there against the defense downed enemy, and 116k against all other enemies that don't have the defense down. So really, really nice for her in that regard. Against Dragon Niche, the numbers are 57k for wave 1, 74k for basically wave 2 against the defense down enemy, 57k if not, and then 209k by wave 3 with 167k if it's not got the defense down on it. So really, really strong there. Koyan Sky can also provide man niche numbers for her, and quite literally, you can stack them for even more absurd damage numbers. And then as we look towards the NP2 numbers, it is more of the same, just even stronger. And then even over on the NP5 numbers, an even greater jump there, as you can start seeing Martha doing very, very respectable neutral damage numbers against some of these units. Numbers that, frankly, people thought we would never see Martha actually capable of doing. Both the power of Oberon and the power of having power mods and niches in play here, but definitely a crap ton of damage for her overall on the output of this stuff. So again, she does have quite the capacity to do a lot of damage. What do you guys think about Martha's new upgrade? Do you guys see yourself using her in more compositions, maybe alongside certain other units? What units do you think you could have the most fun using her with? I'd be curious to hear you guys' thoughts. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys for the next one. Hey, if you like the video, make sure to like and subscribe, right? Back button, most useless quality. I joke, the back button's absolutely valuable.